know yet. They haven't even done the studies to show if that prevents the flu anyway.
Well, you wouldn't know until you went out there and you tested 50,000 people who had the vaccine and 50,000 people who didn't have the vaccine, and see if there's a difference in the incidence of disease or in the severity of disease. That hasn't been done. And yet the CDC and the World Health Organization is trying to tell us, don't worry about what happened in 1976. Just do what the government tells you, because we can't have all these people sick from a flu that's like a cold. It's mind-boggling. I don't know what they're thinking.
Well, you know, too, I've been doing a lot of reading about the swine flu and the history of flus.
Mm-hmm.
And a few years ago it was said that the 1918 pandemic, that we were afraid that something like this could happen again, that there might be bioterrorism, where they would
use it for bioterrorism.
Use it, that somebody might use it for that.
It could
and
be.
So we were supposedly stockpiling some vaccines to be able to protect ourselves if this were to ever happen, you know. But that's kind of dangerous too. That's like playing with fire to do that. And then there was somebody that said, well, maybe we would create our own bioterrorism, and then we'd be able to sell all these immunizations.
Well, these are hearsay things. There are people who are conspiracy thinkers who have come out with statements like that that make you think. But the problem is you don't really know. How would you really know? So you kind of take that with a grain of salt. You'd like to have confidence that our pharmaceutical industry and that our government is a little bit more honest about that. But as we're losing faith in our government, a lot more people are talking about this on radio and TV shows. And it's a scary thing to consider, and you really don't have a way of knowing the answer.
And you don't really want to think that. Nobody wants to even go there.
You
want
to trust your pharmaceutical companies, but we know you can't. You know, we've done many shows talking about the bad karma of Big Pharma, and also of the corruption that's in Congress and in every level of the government. So these are realistic things to consider. We don't have the data to back it up, but it's worrisome.
Well, it's also been estimated that there's something like about 863 viruses, and we've chosen 3 of these viruses to make vaccines for. So how do we pick the viruses to make the seasonal flu vaccine and the H1N1 virus vaccines?
Well, see, all this large number of viruses, they may be possible and they may exist in small amounts, but they don't cause any problems. So what the CDC does, rightfully so, is track those that are ones that are prevalent. There are a lot of people getting sick, so especially if they're causing a lot of problems, if they're causing a lot of disease and killing people, which isn't the case with the swine flu. So usually every year when they're tracking influenza, they pick the 2 or 3 different strains that are prevalent, that are the most likely to cause disease in their estimate, and they ask the pharmaceutical companies to make vaccines against them, and they do. And that makes perfect sense. Should be done. But what does the evidence really show? Do these things work? And the answer is they clearly don't. I mean, there was a study in the October issue of the Archives of Pediatric and Adolescent Medicine that was published that showed that vaccinating young kids with flu had no impact on flu-related hospitalizations or on MD visits, and this was done over two seasons. So we know that. Then in 2008, again, a study in the Lancet journal showed that flu vaccination was not associated with any reduced risk of pneumonia in the elderly. And then a third study that was done by the Cochrane database of doctors, which is a very reputable group, they studied 51 different review studies, and what they showed is that in kids aged 26 to 23 months, and that was a study of 260,000 kids, that it didn't do any good. It was no better than placebo. So we've got a lot of data that's conflicting. People cherry pick the stuff they want to, and they look at a certain perspective of whether or not the flu is something that can be treated with the influenza vaccine.
I don't know how they can really track it anyway. I mean, I know that
they can track it.
That there are tests that can be done. Yeah, but there are a lot of people that get a virus or a flu type, you know, sickness, and they don't go to the doctor. Not everybody goes to the doctor.
You can't track them all, but you can track some, and you can see what the vaccine does in those people. But the problem is that the data isn't that good.
Of course, after they're sick, you don't give them the vaccine. After they're sick, then you give them, maybe give them an antiviral. However, the antivirals only take about a half of a day off of the sickness. Unless you're so sick and you're dying, it really might save your life in that instance.
It does. I mean, it's something to keep in reserve. You definitely want to have it available. But even the CDC has come out, the World Health Organization has come out and made the statement that they don't think it's a good idea for everybody to be taking either Tamiflu or Relenza, which are the two antivirals that are popular. So they're saying don't do that for a couple of reasons. One is if you overuse them, you're going to get viral resistance to it. And like amantadine, which is a previous drug that was used to treat influenzas, it doesn't work anymore.
Well, kind of like what happens with methicillin-resistant staph
It's exactly the same thing. So
only
you don't want to
viruses.
Yeah,
instead.
Plus they have side effects. I mean, people who take these drugs, they're getting vomiting about 30% of the time. They don't sleep right about 10% of the time. They get GI symptoms about 20% of the time. They get mental problems where they get fuzzy thinking and nightmares about 10% or 20% of the time. I mean, these are not drugs that are just innocuous. There were some studies out of Japan that showed that the incidence of suicides was higher in certain groups of people that were taking Tamiflu. So you don't want to just use it because you think you're going to get great benefit from it, because in fact, what do you save? About a half a day of illness. So if you're going to be sick for 5 days, now you're sick for 4.5 days. It may help to prevent the disease. It's good for that. But there are many ways that we can use that are far superior and safer to that, that have been tested in some countries like Germany.
Well, I think what happens is with all the hype and the media and everything that people just panic. And it's just like, just give me something. People always are programmed pretty much to give me something when I'm sick.
I get emails all the time from people who are saying, gee, what can I do to prevent this swine flu that's going around? I'm terrified by it. How do I protect my kids and my family? And it's like, well, what are you doing about colds? You know, are you protecting yourself for adenoviruses or other kinds of illnesses that we get every year in the wintertime? And the answer is we don't. And the answer that we should be giving to people to prevent them is live a healthy lifestyle. You know, eat well, sleep well. Try to get as much exercise as you can to keep yourself fit. Reduce your stress levels. Keep your weight down. If you do all those things, the odds of getting sick are much less. And for people who, when it comes to sleep, you're talking about if you miss 3 or 4 hours of sleep one night, the natural killer cells, which are the cells that fight viruses and cancer, lose 30% of their activity. And you have to keep in mind that when we're giving vaccines, we're doing nothing to help natural killer cells. We're only increasing the antibody response against these viruses. So the body's immune defense mechanisms are not as good as when you get the natural disease. So if it's a serious disease, you want the immunization. If it's not, you don't.
Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the immunizations, because many of these immunizations have what they call adjuvants in them. So these are additives that they put in the vaccine, and many people are kind of concerned about some of the things that they put in them. Now, for years we've been hearing about thimerosal. Well, it looks like they still use it because it's inexpensive and it's a preservative.
Right.
But it has side effects that can be really disturbing. Now, you talk to somebody who has a child with autism, and they're going to tell you that they think that that's how they got it. I guess it hasn't really been proven, but it is a neurotoxin, and it's also been shown to increase the incidence of Alzheimer's disease.
This is fascinating stuff. You know, you look at Hugh Futenberg. He's dead now, but he published 850 scientific papers. He was probably the most recognized immunologist in the world. And he came out with a statement that kind of blew me away. He said if you had 5 consecutive shots in a 10-year period, okay, and he did this from 1970 to 1980, that the risk of Alzheimer's was increased 10 times again, when you compared it to people who had less than 3
I thought that was
shots.
from the aluminum that was in the flu shots.
It could be the aluminum, it could be the mercury, it could be something else. We don't know. And then the adjuvants that are put in there, aluminum might be an adjuvant. I think it is, actually. And squalene is used as an adjuvant. And what that means is an adjuvant is something that boosts your body's immune response to the vaccine. The government, or the people who are making the vaccine, want to make it stretch as far as they can. So they have a limited amount of it. Instead of